The auctioneer's voice was a sharp, rhythmic hammer in the stale air of the county hall. Going once, going twice. I watched my father from across the room. His face, usually a mask of smug authority, was pale and tight with desperation. My mother was next to him, her hand gripping his arm, her knuckles white. My brother, Mark, the golden child, just looked confused, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for someone to blame for this humiliation. He didn't have to look far. I raised my paddle, my hand steady. 1.5 million, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. A collective gasp went through the small crowd. The auctioneer's eyes locked onto mine, wide with surprise, before his professional grin snapped back into place. "Sold!" he cried, slamming the gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot, echoing the finality of it all. The family home, the sprawling estate that had been in our name for 3 generations, was now mine. My family stared at me, their faces a perfect collage of horror and disbelief. They couldn't comprehend that the son they had thrown away like trash was now the man who owned their entire world. They didn't know that the money I used to crush them was seeded by the very inheritance they had stolen from me. You're probably wondering what could make a son inflict this kind of public devastation on his own family. The answer isn't found in my actions, but in what they did to me. It's a story of betrayal that festered for 20 long years, but it truly began the day I found a dead man's secrets locked inside a $5 suitcase. To understand how we got here, in this cold hall filled with the ghosts of our past, you have to understand the boy I was before that suitcase found me. I was the family scapegoat, the shadow that made my brother's light seem so much brighter. And my only purpose, it seemed, was to be the sacrifice that would ensure his success. In our family, there were 2 sons, but only one heir. My brother, Mark, was the son around which our family revolved. He was handsome, charismatic, and effortlessly popular. He got the best grades with minimal effort, was captain of the football team, and had a future that my parents spoke of in glowing, certain terms. I was the shadow he cast, quiet, introverted, and constantly struggling to meet expectations that were never clearly defined. If Mark succeeded, it was his own brilliance. If I succeeded, it was a pleasant surprise. If Mark failed, it was a momentary setback, a lesson to be learned. If I failed, it was confirmation of my inherent inadequacy. The system worked for them. Mark's ego was endlessly inflated, and my parents got to pour all their hopes and resources into a single, promising investment. My role was to be the shock absorber. When Mark wrecked his first car, I was the one who was grounded because I had supposedly distracted him. When he was caught cheating on an exam, I was the one who had to attend counseling for creating a high-pressure environment at home. I took the blame because, in our family, peace was a currency, and my self-worth was the price. I thought that by being compliant, by being the good, quiet son, I might one day earn a fraction of the love they gave him so freely. I was wrong. The breaking point came the summer after I graduated high school. I had saved up $20,000 for college, a mix of grueling part-time jobs and a small inheritance from my grandmother, who I think saw the truth of things. Mark, who was already in his sophomore year at a prestigious university, decided to borrow that money. He didn't ask. He took it and invested it in a friend's can't-miss startup. The startup, predictably, vanished overnight, and so did my entire future. When I confronted him, he just laughed. "Relax," he said. "I'll pay you back." But we both knew he wouldn't. When I went to my parents, my heart pounding with a sense of final, desperate hope for justice, the verdict was delivered. My father listened to my story in his study, his face impassive. My mother stood by the fireplace, refusing to meet my eyes. When I finished, the silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My father steepled his fingers and looked at me, not with sympathy, but with cold assessment, as if I were a failing business asset. "So, the money is gone," he said. It wasn't a question. "Mark made a mistake. He was trying to be ambitious to build something. We should encourage that." I stared at him, my throat closing up. "But it was my money," I whispered. "My college money." "And what is college for?" My father shot back, his voice hardening. "It's to secure a future. Mark's future is the future of this family. Your brother has potential, real potential, to be someone great. This was an unfortunate but necessary expense to teach him a valuable lesson about risk." My mother finally spoke, her voice smooth and coated in poison. "Liam, you're being so dramatic. It's just money. What we need from you right now is support for your brother. He feels terrible about this. Don't make it worse by being selfish." Selfish. The word hit me like a physical blow. I had sacrificed my needs, my feelings, my very identity for 20 years for the sake of the family, and now, when I had nothing left, they called me selfish. It was then that I finally understood. I wasn't a son to them. I was a resource, a safety net for their golden boy. My father stood up, his towering frame blocking the light from the window. "This conversation is over. You will not mention this money again. Not to us, not to Mark. This is your contribution to the family. Be proud of it. It's the most important thing you'll probably ever do." I felt something inside me snap. The desperate, pleading boy I had been just moments before vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just nodded. I turned and walked out of the study, past the grandfather clock, and out the front door. I didn't take anything with me. I left my childhood, my hopes, and the last vestiges of love for my family in that house. As I walked down the long driveway, I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me. I was 18 years old, with $37 in my pocket and a hole in my soul. My life as their son was over. My life as a ghost had just begun. The years that followed were a gray, featureless blur of survival. I drifted from one dead-end job to another, washing dishes in greasy spoons, hauling debris on construction sites, stocking shelves in the dead of night at a grocery store. I lived in a series of bleak, furnished rooms where the smell of damp and despair clung to everything. Loneliness was a constant companion. I learned to be invisible, to keep my head down, to expect nothing from the world, and to offer it nothing in return. The verdict my parents had delivered had become my reality. I was worthless, and my only contribution had been to fade away. The ghost they wanted me to be, I had become. I never contacted them, and they never contacted me. It was a clean break, an amputation. On my darkest nights, I'd sometimes wonder about them, living their perfect life in that big house, celebrating Mark's continued triumphs. I imagined they never spoke of me, that the space I once occupied had been plastered over and painted, as if I'd never existed at all. The thought didn't even hurt anymore. It was just a fact, like gravity. I had accepted my role as the family's forgotten footnote. Then came a Saturday that started like any other. It was my day off, a rare occasion, and I found myself wandering through a sprawling outdoor flea market, not looking for anything in particular. It was a graveyard of discarded things, a symphony of rust and dust. Tucked away under a table piled high with yellowed paperbacks and chipped porcelain dolls was an old suitcase. It was made of dark, scuffed leather, with heavy brass latches tarnished green with age. It looked like it had traveled the world and been forgotten in a closet for half a century. It was an object with a past, an object that felt as lonely as I did. The seller, a grizzled man with a tobacco-stained beard, wanted $10. I talked him down to $5. I had no idea why I bought it. Maybe I just wanted to own something that had once been important to someone. I carried it back to my small, grim apartment. The key was long gone, the lock rusted shut. Using a screwdriver from my toolkit, I pried the latches open. The lid creaked open with a groan, releasing the smell of old paper and cedar. Inside, beneath a neatly folded but moth-eaten wool suit, was a thick, leather-bound journal. The journal's cover was worn smooth with time. There were no initials, no name, just the faint imprint of a hand that had held it many times. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was sharp and precise, slanting aggressively to the right. It was the script of a man who was certain of his own thoughts. The first entry was dated over 50 years ago. "My name is Arthur Vance," it began, "and today is the first day of my real life. My former life ended this morning when my father informed me that my inheritance and my future had been sacrificed to pay for my brother's gambling debts. I have been expelled. I am now free." I sat bolt upright, the book trembling in my hands. I read the first few entries with a ravenous hunger. Arthur's story was my own, written in a different time, but with the same ink of betrayal. He was the second son, the quiet and diligent one. His brother was the charismatic favorite who could do no wrong. Arthur, like me, had been cast out, disowned, and left with nothing, all to protect the family's precious golden child. But the tone of his writing was nothing like the despair I had felt. There was no self-pity. There was only a cold, burning anger and a terrifying clarity of purpose. The diary wasn't a lament, it was a manual. It was a step-by-step account of how Arthur Vance turned his pain into power. He treated his own betrayal not as a tragedy, but as a gift. He wrote, "They did not break you. They freed you. The family you are born into is often a cage of unearned obligations. The moment they cast you out is the moment they hand you the key. Your only duty now is to yourself. Your revenge is not to destroy them with hate, but to build an empire so vast that their entire world becomes an insignificant speck within your own. Success is the only true annihilation." I read through the night, page after page. Arthur detailed his philosophy with chilling precision. He explained how to study people, how to identify their weaknesses, especially their arrogance. He outlined his first small business venture, funded by working 3 jobs and living on scraps. He documented his principles of investing, of leveraging assets, of building a reputation from nothing. He was giving me a blueprint. He was telling me that the hole in my soul wasn't a void, but a space to build something new, something strong, something untouchable. When the sun finally rose, casting a weak gray light into my room, I closed the journal. The emptiness inside me was still there, but it was no longer a dull ache. It was a vacuum, waiting to be filled. For the first time in years, I knew what I had to do. Arthur Vance's first rule was simple. Start where you are, with what you have. The grandest empires are built on the foundation of solving the most mundane problems. He wrote about the power of logistics, calling it the invisible circulatory system of commerce. He noted that while everyone chased glamorous products, the real, unshakable money was in moving those products from A to B. He described a future where small, artisanal businesses would need a reliable, personalized delivery network that the big corporations were too clumsy to provide. He saw this 50 years ago. I was living in that future. My plan was born from that chapter. I kept my night stocking job at the grocery store for income, sleeping a few hours in the morning. My days, which I had once wasted in a listless haze, now had a singular focus. I used the last of my savings to buy a beat-up cargo van for $800. It was a rust bucket, but the engine was solid. I spent a week tuning it up myself, using repair manuals from the library. My first business, Vanguard Couriers, was born. The name was a quiet tribute to the man who had given me a second chance at life, Vance. I started small. I created simple flyers and went to every local craft fair, every farmer's market, every small bakery and workshop I could find. I offered a simple service, reliable, same-day local delivery for a flat fee. My pitch wasn't about price, it was about trust. I spoke to these small business owners, people who poured their souls into their work, and I promised to handle their products with the same care. At first, it was slow, a few deliveries a day, but I was meticulous. I followed another of Arthur's rules. Your reputation is your primary asset. Build it brick by brick with reliability and integrity. I was never late. Nothing was ever damaged. I learned the city's streets, the back alleys, the traffic patterns. I was a ghost in a beat-up van, moving silently through the city's veins. I saved every dollar, living even more frugally than before. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was accumulating capital. The work was grueling, but it wasn't soul-crushing. Every package delivered, every dollar earned, was a small act of rebellion against the life my family had sentenced me to. I was no longer a victim of my past. I was the architect of my future, and I was laying the foundation, one delivery at a time. The next 5 years were a testament to Arthur's core principle. Momentum is a force of nature. Once you create it, your only job is to steer it. The word-of-mouth reputation I had built, brick by brick, became an avalanche. Small bakeries became booming cafes with multiple locations. Artisans I once met at folding tables were now shipping products nationwide. And Vanguard Couriers grew with them. One van became 3, then 10. I hired my first drivers, training them with the same obsessive focus on reliability that had been my only advantage. I moved out of my grim little room and into a clean, sparse apartment. Then I leased a small warehouse that served as our first official headquarters. I was no longer just a driver. I was a logistician, a strategist. I spent my days managing routes, negotiating contracts, and analyzing expansion opportunities. My nights were spent studying finance, corporate law, and market trends, absorbing every lesson from Arthur's diary and applying it to the modern world. He wrote, "Never fall in love with your first success. It is merely a tool to achieve the next one." So, with Vanguard Couriers generating a steady and significant profit, I began to diversify. I started a small real estate investment company, buying undervalued commercial properties, small warehouses, neglected storefronts, and leasing them to other up-and-coming entrepreneurs. I was creating an ecosystem, a network of mutually beneficial growth. I became a different person. The shy, beaten-down boy was gone, buried under layers of discipline and strategy. I learned to speak with authority, to negotiate with cold precision, and to see the world not as a place of threats, but as a chessboard of opportunities. I never thought about my family. They were a part of the past I had amputated, a footnote in a life that no longer belonged to me. Then, one evening, while researching municipal zoning changes for a potential warehouse purchase, a name caught my eye in a local business journal article. It was my father's construction company. The article was brief, detailing a major project that had gone disastrously over budget, leading to significant financial penalties and rumors of instability. I read this short paragraph, my face betraying no emotion. The old Liam would have felt something, a flicker of satisfaction, maybe even a pang of pity. But the man Arthur Vance's diary had created felt only one thing: the cold, clear recognition of an opportunity. The hunter, after years of patient waiting, had just caught the scent of his prey. Patience, Arthur Vance had written, is a weapon. For the next year, I became the epitome of patience. I hired a private financial investigation firm, a discreet agency that specialized in corporate intelligence. I gave them 2 targets: my father's construction company and my brother, Mark. The directive was simple. I wanted a complete picture of their financial world, every asset, every debt, every hidden liability. I wanted a map of their empire so I would know exactly where the foundations were weakest. The reports that came back were more damning than I could have imagined. My father's company was a hollowed-out shell. For years, he had been funneling money from the business to fund my brother's catastrophic attempts at being a big-shot investor. Mark had a portfolio of failures, a collection of flashy tech startups, and luxury lifestyle brands that had all burned through cash and imploded. He had a taste for the high life: fast cars, expensive watches, lavish parties, all paid for by the company his father had built and the inheritance they had stolen from me. The disastrous project the journal had mentioned was simply the final straw. To cover the losses, my father had mortgaged everything: the business premises, the equipment, even the family home. They were drowning in debt, desperately trying to project an image of wealth and stability while the water rose around them. They were one bank call away from total ruin, and they had no idea I was watching. I felt a profound, chilling calm as I read the final report in my clean, minimalist office, a world away from the greasy spoon kitchens and dusty warehouses where I had started. There was no joy, no triumphant laughter. There was only the quiet satisfaction of a complex equation resolving itself. Their downfall wasn't my doing. It was the inevitable result of their own choices. They had bet everything on the wrong son. They had sacrificed the diligent workhorse for the show pony, and the show pony had led them straight off a cliff. Arthur's words echoed in my mind. An enemy's arrogance is your greatest asset. They will build their own prison. Your job is merely to lock the door when the time is right. The time was not yet right, but it was coming. I instructed my financial team to begin quietly purchasing their debt from the banks. I would become their creditor, the invisible force pulling the strings. The ghost they had created was about to become the banker at their door. The final domino fell on a Tuesday. The bank, which I now controlled through a series of anonymous holding companies, called in their largest loan, the one secured by the family home. As expected, they couldn't pay. The foreclosure notices went up, and a date was set for the public auction. I learned through my network that chaos erupted in their house. My father was apoplectic, my mother hysterical. Mark, according to the sources, blamed the predatory banks and the unfair market, portraying himself as the victim. In their minds, this was a tragedy that had befallen them, not the bill for a lifetime of arrogance and foolishness finally coming due. While they scrambled, trying to borrow money from friends who were suddenly unavailable, I prepared. This wasn't about revenge anymore, not in the hot-blooded way most people think of it. It was about balance. It was about closing a loop that had been left open for 20 years. It was about showing them the true consequences of their actions. a lesson Arthur Vance insisted was crucial. True victory, he wrote, is not in the punishment you inflict, but in the truth the defeated are forced to recognize. On the day of the auction, I chose my suit carefully. It was simple, dark gray, and impeccably tailored. It wasn't the armor of a warrior, but the uniform of a man in control. The man who now owned a logistics empire with operations in 3 states. The man who held millions in commercial real estate. The ghost they had banished had become a king in a kingdom they didn't even know existed. I arrived at the county hall and took a seat at the back, watching them. They were huddled together in the front row, looking smaller and older than I remembered. They looked frayed. They made the opening bid, their voices trembling with the effort of seeming confident. A few professional bidders pushed the price up, but I remained silent. I let them fight, letting them feel a sliver of hope. I watched them pool their resources, my father and Mark whispering frantically. They made what was clearly their final, desperate offer. The room went quiet. The auctioneer began his count. Going once, that was my cue. I stood up, and for the first time my voice cut through the hall. 1.5 million. The number was designed to be insurmountable, a shockwave. Gasps rippled through the room. My father's head snapped around, his eyes searching for the source of the voice. My mother and Mark turned too. Their eyes scanned past me once, then snapped back. The recognition dawned, slow and horrifying, like the sun rising over a battlefield. The auctioneer's gavel slammed down, sealing their fate and announcing my return. The boy they had thrown away now owned the foundation of their world. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves, their eyes flicking between me and the pale, frozen figures of my family. I stood my ground, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. My father marched toward me, his face a mottled red. My mother and Mark trailed behind him, looking like refugees in their own story. What is the meaning of this? My father boomed, his voice trying to reclaim an authority it no longer possessed. How dare you to humiliate us like this? My mother clutched her pearls, her voice a trembling whisper. Liam, your own family. How could you be so cruel? Mark just stared, his mouth slightly agape. Where did you get money like that? Did you win the lottery? This is insane. You can't just buy our house. I looked at each of them, seeing them clearly for the first time without the fog of a child's need for approval. I saw 3 desperate people cornered by the consequences they had refused to acknowledge. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I spoke, my voice even and devoid of emotion. This has nothing to do with cruelty or luck, I said, my gaze sweeping over all 3 of them. This is a business transaction. An overdue invoice has just been paid. My father scoffed. Business? This is our home. This is about family. Is it? I countered, taking a small step closer. Because 20 years ago, in your study, you taught me a very important lesson about family. You told me that my future was a necessary expense to fund Mark's potential. You told me my contribution was to disappear. So I did. I took your lesson to heart. I learned to see the world as you do, a place of assets and liabilities. I turned my head slightly to look at Mark, who flinched under my gaze. You were the asset. I was the liability that had to be written off. It seems your investment didn't perform as expected. My father's face went from red to white. You have no idea what we've been through. Oh, I think I do, I said calmly. I know about the failed ventures, the squandered funds, the loans, especially the loans. You see, the bank that called in your final debt, that was me, the predatory force you've been cursing for months. Also me. I haven't just bought your house. For the last year, I've owned your debt. I've owned you. You didn't just have bad luck, you were liquidated. The word liquidated hung in the air between us, absolute and devastating. The last bit of fight drained from my father's face, leaving behind the slack, empty visage of a defeated old man. My mother began to sob. Not the theatrical tears I remembered, but the small, silent, ugly tears of genuine despair. Mark simply shook his head, muttering, "No, no, no," as the full scope of his own catastrophic failure finally crashed down upon him. They had no more words, no more accusations, no more defenses. They were finally silent. "I'm not going to live here," I said into the quiet, my voice softening slightly. "This house is no longer a home. It's a monument to a broken value system. It's a symbol of a family that consumes its own. I have no use for it." My mother looked up, a flicker of insane hope in her eyes. "Then you'll give it back?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm going to give it away. I'm turning this property into a foundation, a place for young people who have been discarded, disowned, or left with nothing. A place that will give them the start that I never had. It will provide shelter, education grants, and seed funding for their own business ideas. It will be a place where worth is measured by effort, not by birthright." I paused, letting the words sink in. I'm calling it the Vance Foundation, in honor of the man who taught me everything I needed to know. This was the final blow. I wasn't just taking their past, I was erasing it and replacing it with something better, something that stood for everything they were not. Their legacy was now a footnote to my own. I looked at them one last time, the three architects of the man I had been forced to become. I felt nothing, no anger, no pity, no love. The account was settled. The books were balanced. The ghost was finally free. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the county hall, leaving them to their ruin. I didn't look back. The old leather suitcase now sits on a shelf in my office. Sometimes I take out the journal and read a random page, not for guidance anymore, but as a reminder that the worst things that happen to us don't have to be the end of our story. Sometimes they are the key, locked away in a dusty old suitcase, just waiting for us to find it and set ourselves free.